Join me at CMC.
Get engaged and get educated.
Join me at CMC.
Everyone is welcome.
Join me at CMC.
Come grow your relationships.
Join us at CMC.
CMC is real,
Authentic conversation.
Engage with curious people.
Plus, we give you access to thought leaders.
Be informed, be inspired.
Through community conversation.
Come here and meet your neighbors.
Be here in the room.
ask questions,
Get answers.
Connecting people and ideas.
Learn about Columbus.
Who will you see at CMC?
Join me at CMC.
You're invited.
Watch us on live stream or in person. You're invited.
Join the conversation.
You're invited.
Welcome to CMC.
Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. We were founded in 1976 by 13 visionary women leaders, and CMC's mission is to connect people and ideas through community conversation. From its very beginning, CMC has welcomed everyone, so we welcome you once again here this afternoon. I'm Deborah Price, a member of the CMC Board of Trustees. Let me begin by introducing you to our newest CMC members. And if you're here, please stand so we can recognize you. Ben-Hur Ayeti with Ben-Hur Studios, Tara Kreider with OSU Public Media, Marissa Long with Inspire PR, Christine Morton with Christine Aviation, Jared Reichert and Rick Reichert with Automotive Group, Reichert Automotive Group. Thank you. Yeah, we know you. Larry Smith with Healthy Urban Communities, and Monica Weiler with Stratus Innovation Group. Welcome to all of our new members, and thank you. If you're not already a CMC member, we encourage you to join. It's easy enough to do. go to the CMC website, Columbus Metropolitan Club, or see any of us members here today, and we can help you. Please take a moment and look at the back of your forum flyers. You'll see the organizations that provide the not-for-profit club here with half of its annual income. You'll also see who's with us here today. And now, to welcome our guests, I want to introduce our very prestigious panel this morning. First, let's thank the sponsor, Reichert Automotive. Today's live stream is presented by Emergency Response Fund for Columbus Foundation and in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch, but we couldn't have done it without Reichert Automotive. So thank you very much. We'd also like to thank Jim Simon for his role in making today's forum a reality. Jim is president of Simon & Associates. Today's forum would not have happened without Jim's support. Jim, you here? Well, thank you, Jim. So let's all thank everybody for being here and supporting the forum. And today's featured speakers are both giants in their industries. It's our great pleasure to welcome you to our stage today. Jim Hackett is a native of London, Ohio. He is a special advisor to the Ford Motor Company and retired as Ford president and CEO. He served from May 2017 to October 2020 and was also a member of the company's board of directors. He retired from Ford in April 2021. Under Hackett's leadership, Ford moved into the era of smart and electric vehicles and deeply embraced user-centered design methods. So a very important time for the industry. Our host, Nancy Kramer, has been recognized as one of the 100 most influential women in advertising history. She has spent a lifetime as an entrepreneur in marketing and technology and has even created 2 Super Bowl ads. That's pretty good. That's real. You can learn more about today's speakers in your forum flyer. So please welcome Jim Hackett, Nancy Kramer. We look forward to today's conversation.
Thank you so much. Those of you that are here in the room and those of you that are on the live stream, I think you're in for a real treat. Jim is literally one of my most favorite humans that I have ever encountered. We have been fast friends for probably almost 30 years.
How old is your youngest?
Yeah.
I can explain that.
Jim's brother is an OBGYN here in Columbus. And as I was delivering 3 children over the course of 6 years, his brother Kevin would say to me, you know, you talk about some of the same things my brother talks about, and I think you two should get together. And so it was Kevin who brought us together, and we've never looked back. So it is my honor to be interviewing Jim today. I think you're going to learn some really fun things. Jim, you know, I think that people were surprised you're from Central Ohio, where you're a shining star. And I know that you were recently back in Central Ohio for a family event, which I think was a bit of a reminder of just kind of the gravity of your experience when you are here. And I'm just wondering, like, given all of your experiences, you know, CEO of Steelcase at 39, athletic director at the team up north, as we call it, you know, CEO of Ford, you know, so many things. What about your time in Central Ohio do you think the environment that really helped shape you?
Well, can I just say to the people in the room and the listeners, I just want to brag about you for 30 seconds because as you heard my brother Kevin said, you sound like one of my patients, Nancy Kramer, and you ought to meet. And I was doing a startup for Steelcase at the time. And Nancy had really one of the first companies in the United States that was thinking about marketing on the internet. She actually did the first website for Apple for Steve Jobs. It was done here in Columbus, Ohio. by Nancy Kramer. So when I met her, I went to her facility, and it's the kind of place that if you were young today, you'd want to work there 30 years ago. I mean, it was an extraordinary statement about hip and cool and with it. And then the other thing that I remember is she built the first live stream runway for Victoria's Secret, where the models were exhibiting the lingerie, and of course it shut down the servers. I think so many guys tuned in, and so at any rate, Nancy, thank you for doing this, because she had a family commitment and she stayed in Columbus to help me out. The other thing is my brother Bob, who's a state senator here, multi-term, was a congressman. He was a commissioner in London, Ohio. I'm very proud of my brothers. I'm going to talk about that connection. My son Patrick is here, who lives in Dublin, and my granddaughter Katie. Katie, raise your hand. She's my date today. I want her to meet all these talented people. The way I talk about my upbringing in London is it couldn't have been more perfect. You know, I was blessed with wonderful parents. Like any family, you know, we had our challenges and opportunities. But I had 3 older brothers. So Bob always called me the sister he never had. And so it tells you a little bit about, I was kind of the peacemaker. I had to help 4, I think, athletically, intellectually inclined people that competed at everything. It was 2-on-2 everything. And so picture this idyllic town, less than 10,000 people. You never locked your door. You knew everybody. And then I had a family that, you know, at the dinner table, they would talk very deeply about topics. I mean, we would get in fights. It was okay to have, you know, deep debates, which serves you well later. Nick Aiken's a friend of mine who runs AEP is here, and serves you well later for the boardroom, you know, when you're going to have those kinds of things. I'd also add something about London, which is, I was talking to my brother Kevin, the physician here in Columbus, and he said, you know, it was like a Renaissance time when I was there, because there were only 3 television stations, there was no internet, so the attention was to the community. So the network I had, because the city was small, was actually bigger than I think somebody who lived in a big city would have. We just knew everybody. And that gave us an even view of all kinds of perspectives on things, which matters as you hear me talk about what I did. So I was back sadly for a funeral, and I went into a place and saw people I haven't seen for 30 years. And what I said to my wife, who was my high school sweetheart from London and almost 47 years of marriage, and she was with me, is that it reminded me of the installation of the values that don't change as you grow and you do different things. So when I would go to China, I met President Xi. In some of the cities that I was, you know, going back and forth looking at facilities for Ford, I would smell the agriculture in China. I would smell what I smelled in London, Ohio. The people that were with me that had never been in the country were like, what is that smell? I go, that's magic. You know, that smell of sweetness, you know, and that's the way my dad used to talk about it as well. So in a circular way, I'm very proud of my heritage here. My parents both went to Ohio State. My oldest brother went to Ohio State. And I decided to wear a May shirt today just to honor them, that they encouraged independent thinking. So as I got off the plane and landed at what we used to call Port Columbus from my visit to meet Coach Schembeckler in Ann Arbor, my dad picked me up and he had this grin. He goes, "You're not going there, are you?" And I said, "I think I'm going to go there." And he said, "I'm never singing that damn fight song." That was his retort. But he was quite supportive of Bo. He knew Bo when he was here in Columbus, and Woody and Paul Brown. And so football was in our family in an inspired way, such that when I hired Jim Harbaugh, I could think about, I was in a house where Bo Schembeckler, Woody Hayes, Paul Brown, you know, traversed. And so I could rank Jim in my mind versus some legends, you know.
Mhm.
And, so London is really important.
Well, so, I mean, what an incredible experience for you. And just, I'm curious, Jim, of like, who would you, looking back at some of that like college years, who would you describe as maybe being an outsized influence? You know, was it Bo? What about that relationship? What about that then kind of translated into your leadership style? Curious about that.
Yeah, and it's across the dimensions of the other things. Bo told the team, like your first day when you arrived for fall camp, the story of being the son of a fireman in northern Ohio, in Barberton, Ohio, which, by the way, is the home of David Kelly, which we'll talk about in a moment.
Yeah.
And they're at a dinner table. Bo's a young man. His dad is trying to move up in the status of the fire department, and so he has to take a civil service exam. Turns out, before the test, one of the other applicants gets a copy of all the answers and says, I'll give them to everybody who's taking the test. And Bo's dad says no, and he doesn't get the job. So Bo's telling all of us 17, 18-year-olds this impressionable story. And Bo at dinner, he's eating, said, Dad, why wouldn't you take the answers? You could have gotten the job. And he goes, who wants to win by cheating? So I get chills when I'm telling you that, because that was his first speech, is that he didn't want to win by cheating. And so I later meet this gentleman, Bob Pugh, who had a long history as the Sun Oil family, the Pugh Charitable Trust in Philly. He goes through a tragic event, and he ends up leaving that family, his mother did, and independently integrates into Steelcase and makes it a billion-dollar company. And one day he says to me, I'm a brand new CEO, he goes, now, Jim, you talk about team a lot. And I was worried, what was wrong with that? I didn't say anything to him. He continued, he said, I just want you to know that people won't work for you if they don't trust you. Now I'm thinking, it's been 6 weeks in the job. Have I done something to betray that? I don't say anything. He goes, so therefore, in everything you do, you operate with integrity. You see that if you operate with integrity, these people will trust you and they'll follow you. So this follows Bo's speech in a very early time of my tenure at Michigan as a player. The chairman and owner of Steelcase makes the same pitch. And then I have the glory of meeting Gerald Ford later, after he was out of the presidency, but his museum's in Grand Rapids, so I was a trustee. And they manage the money. The government pays for the operation of the presidential museums, but everything else is privately raised, the building and the exhibits. So they have a foundation, and he had as his trustees the ex-cabinet members, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, all the notables that were in his administration stayed with him, which is unusual. And I went to a meeting where they were debating about the investment strategy of this foundation. And he used the word integrity over and over. And so his new warship, which is an extraordinary story if you get a chance to go on the web, Gerald R. Ford battleship, which is 3 generations ahead of where China's newest ship is. The title of it is Integrity at the Helm. So guess these 3, they happen to be men, Katie, but they were heroes of mine because I could witness their success and they didn't have to fake it or cheat. And so I'm not perfect, but I adopted that. And I think it does matter in leadership that you can be trusted. Even if you're kind of a half-wit, if people trust you.
I mean, and you became the CEO of Steelcase at 39. So, I mean, that was an incredible, just think, at 39 years old, you're the CEO of Steelcase. That's amazing.
Yeah, and it was kind of, I had a delayed acceptance. I waited a week to take it. Those of you that are reluctant, in some things you get asked to do, I was a reluctant applicant for these CEO positions. I was reluctant to take the AD job at Michigan. Always what was at the core of that was, be careful what you wish for. I mean, there's just two sides to these jobs. They're really difficult. I'm so in love with my family. I didn't want anything to take away from that. So I met a guy that kind of was an advisor in that time, Nancy, and he said, look, when you were born, did your mother say, I'll love you if you become the CEO of Steelcase? I go, of course not. He goes, there you go. You can't screw up. He said, if you go in there and you don't like it or you hate it or you're not very good, your mother will always love you. And I tell that story because it is at the center of, we should not be known for what we do, but who we are. And that's something I would tell young employees in all these places I got to lead.
Well, let's pivot a little bit and talk about Steelcase and talk about the environment at Steelcase, which as an outsider, I feel like your time there was really the genesis of your developing a point of view around innovation and creativity, and certainly one of your more bold moves that was not completely obvious to a whole host of people was when you as CEO decided that you were going to buy, Steelcase was going to buy the global design consultancy, IDEO. And as you said, David and Tom Kelly, both from Barberton, Ohio. Maybe it's an Ohio thing in the water, but like, what about the environment at Steelcase made that? And first of all, how was the environment at Steelcase so focused on creativity and innovation? And then secondly, too, that was not an obvious move strategically. And so how did you bring the company along with that? And what was the manifestation of that?
Well, the roots of the attitude I have start with that family table where, if any one of the brothers got too big a head, the other one would call them on it. And if you declared something, it got challenged. So reason was valued more than, just bluster. And this Mr. Pugh, who's now passed on, he was very much loved by everyone, but he was a gruff guy. I mean, he was kind of very short sentences, tall, a stoic person, and I argued with him. I didn't intend to do that, but the way I grew up, and I think he respected that. So at 39, I was very respectful, but I would say, well, that's just not true, And an example was the cubicle is what made Steelcase 3 times bigger than anyone else, and you all bought them, and they had the physics of the computer and the phone being fixed. So in other words, when we would install a job like a nationwide tower, the phone and computing cabling was brought to the workstation. They were all kind of welded together, so to speak. If you came to work, that's where you took your information from the computer. If someone was emailing you, you didn't have anything at home. Or if they were calling you, you didn't have a mobile phone. So it was something I nicknamed Fixity. In other words, Fixity meant you couldn't abandon the communications connection. So I was arguing with Mr. Pugh about the longevity of that fixity. I just had an instinct because I would go to Palo Alto. And when I was with David Kelly, I thought, by the way, Steve Jobs was David's best man. So I met Steve very early before he goes back the second time. And these are giants in the world of tech. So I get to see them start to imagine. David worked on mobile devices. They weren't phones or computers yet. Handspring was an example of a product. And I started to reason that we're going to have to change. Now, Nancy, I want to give credit because I went out there and worked with them like I would come to your firm. Mm-hmm. And I go, well, I can't work the old way. What was the old way? The old way was you'd go to a meeting, you'd bring up a PowerPoint, people would sit, like this at the table and ask questions. When you went to IDEO, I was on the floor cutting up foam core. We were building prototypes. We were speeding up decision making. So both the question of the way cubicles were going to survive and the method that IDEO imparted on me became the influence of who I became. So a couple of notable things is, here's an example. This is a very bizarre way to think about things. We had 30,000 people at Steelcase, and I was 4th of July going around to all the factories in Grand Rapids. We had 1,000 people in 8 different factories, or 8,000 people times 1,000 person factories. So I made a tour, and I gave this speech where I said, you guys understand that if we take the weight of the computer at the time, so Rhett Reichert, you'll remember this, they were CRT tubes, and they might weigh 50 pounds. And the desk was, say, 300 pounds. So I said, it's 1 pound of computing for 6 pounds of desking. Everybody that works in the factory sitting in the audience like, where's this guy going with this? I said, now what happens if the weight of that computer drops to 20 pounds? Does that mean the desk has to be 120 pounds? I didn't get an answer. I go, what if it drops to 1 pound? Then that desk is 6 pounds, which means it's gone. And so I gave that speech before there was an iPhone and said, so, and one guy in the factory, because I let him ask questions, he goes, well, what are you going to do about that? You know? And I said, well, we're going to have to design a whole new way of thinking about work. And that's when we coined the phrase I and we. Before you ever heard the word iPhone, we said you work in an I space, a cubicle or a private office, and you move to we spaces where a conference room, we're in a we space today. And then that created a ton of work, Nancy, around how do you express the future of work now as computing became mobile. And so we could take that into learning, we could take it into healthcare, we help redesign clinics, and of course the office. So that's how I got confidence, because it all worked. Our market share doubled, everything worked. The company went public because it was private for 100 years, and the family decided so I had to take it public, which was a good and bad thing. And so I learned a lot about transformation. And then in the story, I'm sitting in the Ford boardroom just as a board member. And we'd be like you are at lunch, and I'd be telling stories like this to other board members because they would witness the same thing was happening in vehicles, but we weren't recognizing it. And we could talk about that if it mattered today. But so the value of design, I want to just give you one other example so that it kind of sticks as Nancy takes you through this, is that over time, the ability to make something improves. So if I could unpack for you the Airbus, 321 Neo, that's the hottest airplane commercially. It's a fly-by-wire system. It's really special technology. But in the same period that's being launched by Delta, what was your experience, over the last holiday flying? It was terrible. And we can't blame the airlines for all this. The guy who runs Delta's a friend of mine, so I know Ed really well. And he, the pandemic upended everything. But let's just step back and say, even before the pandemic, how much did you love flying? So what that's called is the design gap. In other words, over time, the ability to make something gets better, but the awareness of use, as our monitor said, the user-centered, that's what that means, gets worse. And there's a bunch of science by why that happens, but I've become an obsessive, compulsive person who stares at everyday things, and I'm using that model in my head. Like, how well is it made, but why do I hate it so much? And so there's industry after industry that needs that attention. And then there's a third twist, which is technology doesn't sit still. Steve Jobs coined a phrase, ascending technology. What he means by that, it's here, but you aren't using it yet. So you go, what's an example today? The metaverse. So there's a whole technology with goggles and cameras that are going to upend the way things are.
Although we
done.
Had a meeting in the metaverse. You and I have had meetings.
You
and I have had.
I know. I asked Nancy to look at it, and she got very excited.
Yeah. It's very.
So I didn't mean to go on, but I thought I'd speed up.
Yeah.
The reason design mattered is that you can see everyday experiences that you hate that can be better. And see, this is why Steve Jobs was such a genius, because he goes in the computing industry and makes it, but he also goes into media. He was working on the television before he died. You never saw what he really wanted to do to it. Because when I had 3 channels on my remote when I was a kid in London, Ohio, it was pretty easy to operate. Now there's on DirecTV, there's over 1,000 channels, and you only watch 10% of them. So that's an example of got made better. We can see 1,000, but it's harder to operate. I'm drawing 2 curves that split in the air. And so I'd love another day to come back and talk to you about design theory, because I think it's the thing that Columbus excels in, but you don't take enough credit for it. You have a lot of talent here that people like Nancy should share more of what they've done in that field.
Well, we're actually building some muscle memory around design thinking. The work we're doing at the Columbus Foundation and at the Columbus Partnership, and certainly the work, Smart Columbus, when you were CEO of Ford and we were awarded the grant, we collaborated on ideating around the city of the future, met with the mayor, that sort of thing. Anyway, the city, different groups within the city are starting to build muscle memory around design thinking and its role in a community and how it can be a different way to solve problems. It certainly was a huge attraction for me with IBM, because that is the way we think about, we innovate and we create using design thinking. We've trained over 200,000 people inside our company on design thinking. So it's for everyone. It's not for designers. I think that, some people might be sitting here saying, I'm not a designer, so how does this apply to me? So maybe you can speak to Nick.
Well, Nick and I both, Nick's an LSU fan. So, and so he and I have honor when we're together in Columbus, because we can get picked on together. But Gene Smith is a good friend of mine. When I was athletic director, he's an extraordinarily good athletic director, and I like him as a man. And I saw him at the game this year, on the sidelines. We had a long talk. Here's an example of design thinking that will be relevant because you're all fans. You see, when I was a kid back in London, Ohio, my dad had his hands in the Cincinnati Reds and the Bengals. He was on the board of both of those. So we would listen to the Reds every night on radio, WLW up in London. And think about that. I didn't see the game. It wasn't televised, but I could listen if Johnny Bench got hits and so on and so forth. The next day I'd open I can't remember what was the first morning paper. It wasn't the Dispatch, right?
Citizen Journal.
It was a Citizen Journal. I would open the journal and look at the box scores. Okay, now what I want you to go with me for a moment is think about, as a fan, how intimate I was, even though it went over many hours, listening on the radio, looking at the paper. I gave a speech at the U of M Regents meeting about this. I said, when we're remodeling the stadium, told Gene this too, we need to bury fiber optics everywhere. Why? Nancy could tell you more about this. It's because of the information the fans going to need when they're in their seats. And the Regents said, well, they can see the game. I go, yeah, but the problem is they can see the game remotely with more information. They don't have to come to the game to see it with less information. Now, the partying in the parking lot is one thing that makes people come. But Gene's dealt with this too. The fan uptake at Ohio State and Michigan dropped through some periods where they had extraordinary seasons. And it's because the optionality of being just as good a fan with more information. So we could redesign stadiums such that while you're in the seats, with the cameras that are going to be deployed for the metaverse, you could actually be fed things in parallel. And all you have to do is put on a pair of glasses like these, not goggles. And the glasses will be emanating information. Now, this is 5 years away, but that's an example of design thinking. And Ohio State will not be dragging its tail to add this kind of capability because it wants to be on the edge. And that's how I thought about competing all the time.
Well, so Jim, how did you apply design thinking in the locker room at Michigan?
Well, I was working more. Look, I took the job for a month and left 18 months later. So it was I was being disciplined about not trying to overwhelm them with too much of this, but eventually I couldn't help myself. And so the whole ticket experience, like, why do we have paper tickets? Which challenges as you come through the turnstile and you get backed up, you get backed up because you're trying to show your iPhone. The design opportunity is huge. Let's even go more deeply. If you see Ann Arbor as the size of the city, it's much smaller than Columbus. The day of the game, 150,000 people descend into the city. They have to shut down the traffic. As I later ran forward, I go, you know what? We could assign people times for the car to arrive. They're that smart. You can have an appointment in traffic. Think of it that way. Now, it seems silly, right? I just want to go when I want to go, but that's not really true. The studies we did at Michigan, we trailed people and said, what time do you get ready to go to the game? Depending on which city you lived in Michigan. Might be 2 hours. And, we always go at this time because we want to get set up. Okay. Would you be willing if we gave you an appointment so there was no friction? Yeah, I'd love that. Would you pay for it? I would pay for it. So that's an example. I didn't get that done. And I later was at Ford seeing how we could use the power of the Ford technology. But I promise you, when we were talking to the smart city people here, the only way you're going to be able to handle the complexity of all the traffic is for it to be an operating system itself. So the vehicles are like packets in a computer network. They just are assigned responsibilities to be somewhere at a certain time. And it's really at your discretion, so you don't feel like you're being regulated. But it takes a lot of the pain and suffering out of traffic, which is a big issue.
So Jim, talking about the mobility, and I remember when we met with Mayor Ginther and we were talking about that the city's going to need an operating system, and I think that blew everybody's mind, including mine. I think we've referenced it. We continue to reference it. You taught us that here in this community, and it was very helpful. When you stepped off the board to take on the mobility, I mean, you first were on the board of directors of Ford. Bill Ford asked you to step off, lead this thing called Smart Mobility. I mean, you had been retired from Steelcase, and your 1 month at Michigan that had, seeped into 18 months, was passed. How did you decide? What made you decide to do that?
Well, first of all, Bill Ford is one of my favorite people that I've gotten to know in my business career. In fact, I think we'd be like mischievous brothers. I mean, that's the thing. I said, we're like two guys in the 8th grade getting in trouble all the time because he's just such an affable, loving human. And he has the weight of the Ford name on everything. And yet he's the most approachable, down-to-earth man in my network. And so I'm giving you a hint of the hold he has on me. And so I took the Ford board out to Palo Alto when I was on the board. I said, we need to go out there. And we had a series of great speakers that were talking about some of the things I'm hinting about: smart vehicles, networking of cars. And it wasn't happening fast enough except at Tesla, which was a very, very small company when I started on the board. And while we were there, Bill loves this stuff, and we broke for something, and he came to me, he goes, I got an idea. And I thought we were going to try and recruit one of the speakers on the board that I really loved in the tech world, which I don't want to embarrass him publicly. And he goes, no, I want you to go. I want you to help me with this. And initially I was going to stay on the board and do it, but that has SEC complications. Mm-hmm. So I had to step off. And he said, do it for 6 months. And then you'll come back on the board. Mm-hmm. And well, in the 6 months, he came back and said, the board would like you to run the company. And I said no at first, because we had a really good CEO, but he had grown up in the car business. So, which is a really important thing for the people here that represent Ford. You need that. You need to understand how cars are built. But I was forecasting a world where the car was going to operate more like an iPhone, and he hadn't have experience. So that's how I got drafted, and I thought I'd do it for a year. mostly because, I say this to my kids, it's not a hobby to take jobs like that. The flight to China, Katie, is 15 hours one way and 15 hours back. So when you think about a 40-hour work week, think about 30 over 40 hours. You're just sitting in an airplane. And I would make, 10 of those trips a year when I was, running all these companies, and I got tired of it. So I hesitated, but I jumped in. Bill even said, you don't have to go anywhere, just help us with this, but you can't run a company if you're not out there. So 42 months later, I felt like the successor is an extraordinary talent, Jim Farley. He worked hand in glove with me on this vision. A lot of the products that you're seeing, Rhett Reichert helped me. He was on a special group of, I think there were 5 of us, weren't there, that would meet, and we would forecast the future of intelligent vehicles. Reichert automotive dealership already has a configurability for commercial vehicles. If you in the audience buy vans, they can fit them out for you. And my vision was the software in the future has to be configured in that vehicle. So he was a wonderful partner. And a lot of the stuff we imagined, like we were looking at the Mustang one night, they were struggling inside Ford. This is the electric Mustang. We only build 15,000 of them. You can't afford to build a production line. So we said, let's bump them to 25,000. The scale is now 200,000. So it really was a big idea, and it tells you how much the world likes it. And I want to tell you, I got a lot of crap from what I would say the traditionalists for Mustang ought to just be a Mustang. And I said, mostly men would say this to me. I go, you're not our target. It's the women who are going to drive this, and it's built for them, and they love it. Just to honor our club and the influence that women have had, that's the reason Ford's experiencing a wonderful renaissance in the electric, because of the women buying the vehicles.
Well,
so anyway, I just to solidify that, I stepped into the role, and I had to rewind the tape. Integrity, trust. Do I have a team that knows how to operate that way? I don't want to indict everybody, but there were some people that had the wrong idea. And that takes time. I had to teach design thinking. What do you mean by that? You share what I sent you last night, because we can't put it on, but would you tell them what I sent you?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really great video that Jim shared with me last night. He created a whole kind of skunk works operation between IDEO, this wonderful global design consultancy, and Ford, called Greenfield Labs, and it was based in Palo Alto. And he borrowed on his roots of London, Ohio, and how a farmer creates a pole tent as a way to kind of extend their operations. And he used that metaphor for what they needed to be doing, and got people from a cultural standpoint to think very differently about their work.
So my brother and those from London know a pole barn is
a pole barn, sorry.
No, that's perfect. And it's usually a very fast construction that's really important for your adjacent operation. It's how you scale. And so we had this big green tower that everyone worked at Ford called the greenhouse. And we're not in the greenhouse, we're in a pole barn out here. You can't imagine how counter that was to the culture, because it was too casual. Everybody in the auto industry used to have the pocket kerchiefs and ties. And, I was trying to reduce that back to what I learned at Steelcase. It makes egalitarian is a better way to run a company, because everyone feels a member in that. So anyway, that just explains how 12 months became 42. I had to get all that in place.
Well, Jim, last question before we open it up, because we've got people that want to ask you questions as well as people online. As you know, this community, Columbus is on fire by all measures, and the announcement with Intel and everything that's happening, fastest growing city in the Midwest. And given your vision, if you were CEO of Central Ohio, what would be the 3 or 4 things you'd focus on?
Well, I want to just commend everyone, because my son is a resident here, and my granddaughters and my daughter-in-law, and I'd have to pry them out of Central Ohio. They love it here. And he grew up in West Michigan. And I know why he loves it, because I want you to hear in me why I loved growing up here. So that is a beginning point, is the nature of people and accessibility of values and connectivity of all that. I mean, you got to start with that. Now, people like Nick Akins and I love companies being here because you need talent. And so that's the first thing we have to make sense of. So I was doing a little study last night on the chip industry because of the Intel announcement. And you realize China has 5 million graduates in the engineering science field to our much smaller group. This is why it's not the political argument. It's why we've got to have borders that allow scientists to come in, because you can't build a big enough team with just what we're graduating. And I'm trying to get my granddaughter, because I've learned from other powerful women like Nancy that we teach her what a Barbie doll is, but I also teach her what the design of an EcoBoost engine is. And so that she has the capability to do both things. So that's talent and education. And you've got a big advantage there with a great university. I mean that sincerely, and how well it's been run. And medical systems, utilities, all that matter to attracting companies. Third thing is you have to think about playing ahead versus fast. So here's what I mean by that. When I was chasing Elon Musk as a competitor, I had to make up, this is based in physics, that the speed of light is the fastest you could move. So if somebody said, look, Jim, you need to move faster to catch up with Tesla, but he's moving at the speed of light, metaphorically, I'll never catch him. So how do you beat him? You aim over the top. And that's true, actually, in competing at large with anything that has technology in it. So you have to find ways to prototype the evolving technologies before you're perfectly comfortable about it, because you're learning as you prototype it what's good and bad about it. And so there's a bunch of ideas, but let's just start with the metaverse. The idea that you could go to health or learning settings or work settings where you could be virtual or augmented in reality could change the face of Columbus. And you don't have any disadvantage with Northern California, even though a lot of people are investing in it from there, because you have all the people working in it. So that's an example of what I would advocate.
Thanks.
I don't know, helpful?
Yes, super
Okay.
helpful, super helpful. So Jane,
I have some
you have
questions.
some questions
I have
from
some
the.
questions online.
Great.
And then anyone who has a question in the audience, please just come up and get in
Fantastic.
line and we'll take questions here as well. So if I can do this, Jerry Hutland, whose Global Futures Group, in light of your Steelcase and Ford career, and congratulations, by the way, what are your thoughts on working from home? Is not there an opportunity for new home design and furniture and 15-minute neighborhood design that allows people to drive less, work at home more productively? Workers could save money, consume less fuel, and lead a more pleasant life. And there was another question regarding, you were part of changing from a closed office system at Steelcase to more of an open landscape kind of a system. What's our change now?
So those are the great observation. Thank you for the question. And so while I was running Ford, the last year I worked from Grand Rapids. I ran a Fortune 9 company from Grand Rapids, Michigan, because everyone was working at home. And I'd been a big believer in this already. So I'd counter some of the CEOs that you're hearing in the paper. I don't want to offend any of them, but I think the workers prefer hybrid. And let's make it even clearer. You ought to go to the office when you're working with others. There's no need to go there when you're working by yourself. In fact, you prefer when you're working by yourself not to be interrupted and get into a thing called flow. So the design of spaces have to enable more lab-like settings where you put your teams working on prototypes, and that's the physical thing you have. And then the hybrid part is when you can work remotely. And that's where we should be going in the future. What I've hinted about with this power of the metaverse, which just to make this clear to those that don't know what it is, it's the intersection of really strong computing power such that environments that you're looking at through glass look like they're real. You can't touch them, but they feel real. So I've been in meetings with Nancy for 2 hours, and you think you're in that place. You take these goggles off and you're back in Grand Rapids, but you're in another place. So work in the future is about being able to go to these places remotely, very quickly, quick switch. So we have to make the spaces, these physical spaces, ready for that. So you see these, I don't know if those are cameras or microphones, they probably are cameras. You see them staged for our broadcast. That actually will be the norm for every room in the future, including your home, because that puts you in the metaverse.
I'm Scott Whitlock, a member of the club. What do you see as the most important advantages Ford Motor Company has in competing with Tesla?
Well, this is something we went deep and wide on, and our brand recognition and trust is extraordinary. Elon is, as my son Patrick says, he's a cult of personality. He's an extraordinarily gifted scientist. And yet, when you see the Ford Promise and Ford Pledge, which one do you trust to have kind of the commitment throughput? I mean, he's an extraordinary, innovative guy that's delivered on virtually everything he said. So he's built trust, but we have over 115 years or something. So the Ford brand is an extraordinary thing. When we were in China, they closed the street for Bill to make access to one of the meetings. I mean, that's how popular the Ford name is. So I believe in that. The second thing is building cars is extraordinarily difficult. So this is Elon's outspoken about how he slept on the factory floor trying to change the construction process. I used that with my team and said, I'm not sleeping on the floor at Ford, so therefore you should believe he's learning things that I'm not learning. And we have to remember that phrase. We got to aim ahead versus fast. So Ford is building a factory of the future. We have a bunch of new ideas that are coming forth with the announcements that'll blow you away. An example of one thing is because electric vehicles have no transmissions, you actually put the battery in and the car drives itself through the factory. So we don't have to build all those jigs and fixtures, which cause a lot of investment. A third thing is our dealer network. And you got to understand, Ford made a decision to sell direct. Customers like the speed of that, but they hate the service part of it. And I would say even the knowledge and the recognition of what, Rhett Reichert doesn't forget what your family's bought for years and what you like and what your wife might hate. That's really hard to put in an artificial system to manage. And so the speed of transactions, though, have to improve through our dealer network. Rhett worked with me on this. And so I think the dealer network's like an extraordinary advantage. Those would be my short list.
Thank you.
I'm going to mess up this guy's name. Nate Rapeau from IBM. How do you see Ford using blockchain and AI in the future?
So just to get everyone at the same speed, blockchain is a mechanism of using smart arrangements. So if I take the car business, for example, when you buy a car, you get a VIN number, and you take that to Secretary of State, and they validate that there's such a thing, and they give you a license plate. In the future, that all goes away in so many ways, because the blockchain means no one could ever cheat and fake a VIN number because you can't replicate them. Blockchain's behind this thing called cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency couldn't work if you didn't have blockchain. We're not going to get into why crypto's crazy or smart, but blockchain's really important. And IBM's one of the leaders in the world in blockchain science and how it works. So I should have added that when I was talking about Columbus's ability to compete. Remember I said if you could take an ascending technology and advance it, you ought to build the license registration around blockchain. You ought to build many of the transactions that drive you crazy. Time, can't get a hold of anybody. Think of the world you're in. We could build those around blockchain. Now there's new challenges if you put it in blockchain. We won't employ as many people. We don't need all these people checking things, but we'll give them jobs in some of the new ascending things. So I think you're wise to imagine blockchain transforms everyday processes. That's the way I'd like you to think about it.
So the current situation in Ukraine and relations with China and the global supply chains that we've had, how do you see that changing our environment and opportunities for Columbus, or maybe more things like Intel doing domestic production?
These are such smart and timely questions, and I want to admit, see, I was of the generation where in manufacturing, it's called vertically integrated. It means you make everything on site for what you're going to use. So Ford, the River Rouge complex at one time had 150,000 employees in that one complex. And they mined the ore from the soil right there and smelted it into steel in big furnaces and made cars. Turns out, over time, it's faster if you delegate that to an outside supplier who can serve lots of other people, your costs drop. Well, if you can delegate it, then you could move it to China because the labor was cheaper. I was in the world where that happened. Mm-hmm. But then the pandemic taught us that distance was a negative. And so the whole world is returning to this question of how can I have all the advantages of outside supply chains, but have them closer. And so an explosion. Look, when I went to London, I couldn't believe the number of semis and warehouse facilities that have been birthed since I've been out of here. And it's because of the supply chain movement. The promise with that in the future is all the vehicles become autonomous. And so that actually is going to speed up. Like, if you hate getting behind semis, that'll get better in the future because the autonomous vehicles will restrict that. Now, China's not going to sit back, though, and just let them lose all that share. So when you look at the chip production, you realize 77% of the equipment bought to make chips, the kind that are going to go in, what's the town where Intel's building here?
Well, it's Licking County.
Licking County.
New
Albany. 77% of that equipment's made built for Asia, Japan, Korea, and China. And when you look at the underlying tax incentives, they have 100% depreciation on that equipment, which we should have in the United States. I mean, these all feel like corporate welfare. You got to think of it the other way. It's the way you can compete with their corporate welfare. And so that's where I see the bigger risk. And they're in aerospace, they're in tech, because they're spending government money to enable that.
So I think we have time for one more question before we have to move on from the live stream. No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Gail Harper Perry with Codewind Systems. I would just like for you to speak a little bit about Ford's investment in Ohio.
Well, Bob knows this. I love our governor here, DeWine. I wrote him. He came to see me. Of course, we told Bob Hackett jokes for the first half hour, and then I found him. I just want you to feel this when business and government work. He's an extraordinarily accessible guy, down to earth, and so for Ohio. So I have and when we had to shut facilities down. Bob, you and I were talking about this at the funeral home. I called him because we had to close factories during the pandemic. And I thought he was really courageous because of all the governors in the country, he was one of the first ones to worry about you publicly. And you need to know the math was if he didn't act then, like if I hadn't closed the plants when I did, we'd had 3,000 more people dead in 4 weeks. We only had 6. That's what the rate of the virus spread and death was happening. So when he started to do that in Columbus, he saved a lot of people. And now there's an argument how long you have to stay with it and all that. I get that. That's very hard. So Ford has a bigger, and I saw pictures on the web where our head of North America was just down in Northern Ohio and enabling. So we're making all kinds of investments here. The challenge is the transmission plants while they'll operate for a number of years, eventually they go away. You don't need all that gearing in the electrical systems. But Columbus gets itself in this state that I'm talking about with chip design and everything. It can then have these new kinds of facilities. I can't speak for Ford, obviously, anymore. And there's a lot of competition for auto factories, let me tell you, all around the world. But we love Ohio.
Well, I hope you all found this as fascinating as I did, and how privileged we are to have two wonderful visionaries right here at lunch with us today. Thank you both so much. I really like the part about making things better, but harder to use. Can we work on that harder to use part a little faster?
Yeah.
It's just, it really is, I think, a challenge for many people to keep up with how fast things change and move. And especially folks my age, I guess, maybe is more fair to say. But I want to thank again Reichert Automotive Group. Thanks, guys, for helping make this happen today. Jim Simon and Associates. And thank you to our online virtual patrons and to the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation for presenting our live stream in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. Please plan to join us next Wednesday. The topic is the end of illegal abortion in Ohio. And I'm glad to see, Doug, that you put a question mark on the end of that. All right, that's great. To our special speakers today, Jim Hackett and our host, Nancy Kramer. Honestly, it was a privilege being here with you today. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. We couldn't do it without you. See you next week.